Hi, how are you? Hey everybody, great to see you. Oh, thank you, please. Right, shut the fuck up.
You need to leave!
Hello, it's me, I'm back again with your favourite thing. That's right, my opinions. So welcome back to another list for Total War Warhammer 3, a game that gets regular content and updates. Today we're going over the easiest start for every faction. Now these are obviously the starts that are just so easy that you don't even really need to play. You can just kind of weigh down the end turn button and you'll do just fine. This is going to be judged on a variety of criteria, how strong that lord is in combat in the early game, how strong their army is, how weak their nearby enemies are, who their nearby enemies are, and of course their general vicinity and how easy it is to expand and enjoy the early game. That's pretty much it. The factions have the easiest start. You know, what more do you want from me? Also, if you're wondering where the Lizardmen battle guide is, I'm very busy at the moment, and that video, they have a lot of units, so that's going to be a lot of work, so that's getting pushed next week, but don't worry, it is coming. And now, just before we get into the list, I have a very important thing to say. Every year, millions and millions of people suffer from not being subscribed to this channel. I know, it is a global tragedy, but you can help fix this cruel injustice in just 2 seconds. You just click one click on that subscribe button and you will be saving yourself and many others from not being subscribed to this channel. So please join me in clicking the subscribe button today. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's get into the list. First of all, the Beastmen. Now the Beastmen obviously don't have any settlements, so you don't really need to worry about defending anything, and you can kind of go wherever you want from your starting location and attack, well, pretty much everybody. Let's be honest, it's the Beastmen. You also have to factor in much more how strong their lords are and their armies are, because let's be honest, all you're going to be doing is fighting, so you need to have a pretty strong army right out the gate to get over all that fighting. And can you tell I'm basically trying to stop myself from immediately saying the most obvious answer, and that is of course Taurox. It's obviously him. He's so ridiculously strong, especially in the early game, that it's not even close. This guy is huge and can win most early game battles completely by himself. He's super duper tough, has a bunch of damage, is super fast, has a charge bonus, it's massive, it's made of brass. My god, the guy's unkillable. On top of all this, he starts in the middle of the Dark Elves, which are pretty mid in the early game, so he can just stomp straight over them. He also has his rampage mechanic, so you know he can take out entire factions across a single turn. He's ridiculously overpowered in Warhammer 2, and in Warhammer 3, he's still pretty damn strong and is definitely the easiest start for the Beastmen. Coming to Bretonnia now, and this one is going to be the same as it was all those years ago in the Warhammer 2 video, and that of course means that Thane Chantress is our winner. Even though her start has changed, it's still just so damn easy. She has one orc army and one settlement, which can be taken out in a turn or two if you really want to take your time and, you know, build up your resources before you take out that settlement. Once she takes them out, she has a full province and can pretty much just relax. Of course, she has Grom to the north, but aside from him, pretty much everyone in the immediate vicinity is either neutral in the form of the Wood Elves or allies in the form of all the other Bretonians and eventually, you know, the Empire and everyone else. If you're feeling especially aggressive, you can take the fight to Grom, which you probably should to stop it from getting any stronger, and you can easily get your first vow, get some better cavalry units, and then wipe him out in seconds, and then you pretty much just weigh down the end turn button until Ikit Claw makes his way up, or, you know, the Dark Elves come from the coastline, or anyone else, but no one is really going to come get you. You can just kind of sit there, get good relations with the Bretonians, get some trade deals, get some confederations using their research, and have a great time. There's just not a lot to hamper you, you know. You've got that increased regen, so even if your army does take some hits, it'll regen them all very quickly anyway. You can just kind of sit there, weigh down the end turn button, and sit AFK, and she'll do just fine. It's not the most exciting start by any means, but it is ridiculously easy, and that's what this list is all about. Next we have the Demons of Chaos, and we've got Daniel here. Winner by default. He's the only choice, so he's of course the best and of course the worst start for every lord, and that's going to come into effect in a future video, of course, because after the best, we of course must do the worst. So yeah, winner by default, he wins. Let's move right on. Now we come to the Dark Elves, and for the most part, the Dark Elves are all pretty much in the same strength region, at least starting out. All their armies are pretty much the same. They don't have anything that is ridiculously overpowered, with one exception that we're going to come to in just a moment. The start locations are also some of the most spread across the map. You know, you have the main concentration of Malekith, Marathi, and Crone Helbron up in their actual homeland. You have Malus doing whatever he does. You have Lokir Felhart all the way over in Cathay, and then you have Rakaf down in Lustria. And I'm going to surprise some of you here, and I'm going to go for a calf down in Lustria. Now I know what you're thinking, Lustria is not the most hospitable place, but it's not really that bad anymore since a lot of people have been moved out to the Badlands. Now the reason I'm going for a calf is down to pretty much one thing. His monsters. The man starts the campaign with War Hydra, which, let me just let that sink in for a second. Balance, apparently. And then on top of this, he can get feral carnosaurs and harpies and all sorts of ridiculously overpowered monsters for the early game ridiculously quick. Like, I played a quick campaign as him, I had a carnosaur by turn 5. How is that balance? See, the reason that Lustria isn't that bad to him isn't because some of the lords have been shipped out and it's not as crowded as it used to be. No, no, no. The reason Lustria is so overpowered to him is because if he beats Lizardmen, he can get some of their dinosaurs on his side and fighting for him. So in the early game, he can get an army full of Carnosaurs and Stegodons and all sorts of random monsters. He's so crazily overpowered with that farming mechanic that you can get an army that no one can deal with in the early game before anyone else. It's ridiculous. Even though he has no friends in the area, it doesn't matter, because he fights against the people that are there and then turns their own units against them. Now comes to the dwarves, and since Grombrindle has moved out of Thorgrim's house, I think it's really hard to pick anyone but the High King himself. All the armies here are about as strong as each other, and while some of the lords have different strengths up and down, Thorgrim really comes out overall as the best. He admittedly starts with a few enemies, though none of them are really major threats to him. Sure, he has Skarsnik to the north, and Queek to the south, and then Grimgor all the way over to the northeasterly region, who won't make his way down for a very long time. The most he has to worry about is the greenskins that are up in the mountains with him, but he can take them out pretty easily, and this is helped by the fact that Thorgrim is an early games dominator. He's super duper armoured, so no one has armor piercing at this stage, so can't really touch him, and he has a bunch of base weapon damage even if it isn't all armor piercing, but no one has armor at this point apart from the dwarves, so no one can really touch him. For the most part, he can sit in the mountains and slowly expand his kingdom while making friends with all the other dwarves due to his increased relations. It really is just that simple. Yeah, he might have to fight a battle or two, but it's nothing crazy to worry about, and he'll be able to carry it just by himself. Next up, we come to the Empire, and I don't think this one is going to surprise anybody. I'm of course talking about Big Daddy Emperor Karl Franz. Now, he just has it all. He has the safest starting location, one of the easiest starting wars, and he's completely surrounded by other Empire factions. And while all of them may not love him and want to, alliance with him, most of them will at least not be aggressive unless he does something to provoke them. He doesn't have any major threats that are super duper on his doorstep. Sure, he's got Festus to the north and then vampire counts all around, maybe a greenskin or two, but it's nothing crazy that he has to worry about super early on. If you're looking for a really good starter campaign, the Empire aren't the best, but there is a reason that Immortal Empires opens on Karl Franz, and let's be honest, it's because he says some of the elect counts and everyone wants to hear him say line bar, but it's also because if you want to play the Empire, they are one of the easier factions to learn, and also Karl is the easiest of the Empire factions. Now we come to Grand Cathay, and as far as battling power goes, the two Cathayan siblings are pretty much on par with each other, since they can both transform into big dragons and also have fantastic spells. So instead of judging them on what they have themselves, you have to then judge them on what they're up against. And when you judge them like this, it becomes clear that Miao Ying is the favoured child, and something is reversing up my stream, I do apologise. It becomes clear that Miao Ying is the favourite child, and has a much easier time of it. She starts at the top of Cathay, right by the Great Bastion, and while she isn't in control of the three gates, all three gates do start built, so, Kaesa's going to have to work the way through them before it gets to her, and then when they do, she can just push them back and take them over anyway and then build them up herself. Her only starting war is against a weak Cathay faction that she can easily take out in just a few turns with her dragon form because, they can't really touch her. Sure, Snitch is going to come for you at some point, but you just go into encampment stance and just push him back. Early game, Skaven units aren't going to be able to do anything against her. Zhao, by contrast, is in a completely open area, every single direction. There are vampires, ogres, and more, so it just has a harder time keeping himself safe. They're both really strong, but easier to start off with. You absolutely have to give it to Miao. Next come to greenskins, and honestly none of them have a completely safe start, although to be fair that is mostly because greenskins kind of prefer to fight literally everybody, including each other, rather than being friends. So instead of who has the safest start, we're instead going to judge them on who has the easiest start and can get ahead in the campaign faster than anyone else. When you look at it like that, you have no choice other than Wurzag, the Great Green Prophet. Now I know this is kind of copying from the old list, but let's be honest, it's still him. He's still just the best. He may start in the Badlands, which has now become its own little Royal Rumble of sorts, but he can dominate that Royal Rumble in one easy way. The tribe leader mechanic, as I like to call it, which allows him to confederate the other greenskin factions in the area, which are all super duper weak. On top of this, he also starts with savage orcs and can recruit them faster than anyone else, and while physical resistance isn't the best in the game, in the early game, especially against some greenskins, they're not going to have any magic to take them out, so he'll just be able to roll over the people and confederate them instantly. Then once he has all this land under his control from all these confederations, he can do whatever he wants. He can build them all up to farm out a load of cash, he can build them all up to get himself a fantastic army, and then go off in the mountains and take out Thorgrim with his newfound black orcs on turn 25 or whatever. If you can do all this and then also get a war, whoever you aim it at is not going to survive, guaranteed. He's not super safe and relaxing to play like some of the others on this list, but if you're looking to tear through the map at breakneck speed, he's the guy for you. Now we come to the High Elves, and since the beginning of time, and by time I of course mean Warhammer 2, there has been a faction that is so easy that whenever I was asked, I would always say, play this faction first. They are ridiculously easy. And yeah, that's not really changed. It's of course Tyrion, who is now leading the Attain faction. This faction is so easy that toddlers could play and do well. For one, he starts on the donuts, so for the most part, will be free from outside interference. Sure, there are a few new threats on the donuts, he's got his starting war, there's also the people up in the Shrine of Cain, and then the carry's also there, but he doesn't really have to worry about those to start with. He's just got his starting war. Once you take them out, you don't really have to worry about anything. Once he's done with his starting war, he can just make friends with the rest of the High Elves there due to his increased relations, and while there are some that won't love him and might need taking out, the majority will come on side and will confederate with relative ease, well into the early game, just before the mid-game. Yeah, we'll have to worry about Nakari from the north, but by the time he, she, or they make their way down to him, he doesn't really have to worry about it because he'll have a ton of gold, a ton of land, and he'll probably have a way better army than they will anyway. And did I mention the fact that, of course, the High Elves are one of the richest factions in the game, and when you can confederate them all, it tends to make it even richer. He makes a bunch of money from trade, buildings, pretty much everything. Tyrion can make easy money. Now come to Khorne, and we've only got one option here, so it's of course going to be Scarbrand again. Winner by default, let's move on. Next up, we come to Kislev, and let's be honest, this is yet another race that Boris should be completely banned from, because he just doesn't have anything to do with it. He starts with no settlement, is taking the fight to Chaos, and doesn't really get to use half of their mechanics, so has a lot on his plate survival-wise, so we're just going to knock him out of this race. But for the other two, it can be a little bit closer. I think I'd have to give it to Katerin, and it's not really because she's so good and so easy, it's more because Kastaltin just has it way harder right out the gate. He starts just south of Norska, so he's going to have to deal with all those guys coming down pretty much immediately. On top of this, Azazel is also basically right on his doorstep, and fighting against Demon Lords early on is a recipe for disaster because they just start out so ridiculously overpowered. They start out as a giant monster, whereas Kastaltin starts out as a guy with a stick. Katerin, however, starts in the center of Kislev, in the city of Kislev, and she only really has to worry about the Norscan invaders that are there. Sure, it's not the easiest starting war in the game. In fact, it's possibly one of the more challenging, but once they're taken out, she's surrounded by other Kislev factions, and she can get them all on side relatively easily. And then she can win the political race, she can confederate a bunch of them, and then she just has to wait for, the other enemies to arrive. But her enemies don't really arrive until a little bit later into the game. Sure, she's got Throt nearby, but he's going to kind of stick to Hell Pit for a little bit. Yeah, Norska's going to come down, maybe Chaos as well. But again, not super early on, so she's got lots of time to prepare for that. As I said, it's not one of the easiest starts in the entire game, but it's definitely the easiest in a faction that honestly has it pretty rough across the board. Next up, we come to the Lizardmen, and I think this one is pretty obvious, and it has been since Warhammer 2. I'm of course talking about the Great White Lizard, Gorok. Now this ease is mainly down to two reasons. The first is Lord Croak. He's so ridiculously overpowered, he's one of the most overpowered casts in the game, and he gets him on turn 1, so I can get those spells, by turn 2 if you play any cards right. Balance, I guess. Next up, the second reason is Gorok, who is one of the best fighters in the game. He's super duper tanky, has a bunch of damage, and nothing in the early game is really going to be able to touch him, especially when you consider that most of the time he's going to be going against rats and other things. Yeah, all the factions he has to deal with aren't ideal. He has to take on Lord Skrolk and a bunch of other rats and a couple of other factions. Lustria isn't the best place in the world. It's nowhere near as bad as it used to be, but it's still not the best. But honestly, they can get so much momentum that just an army of Gorok and Lord Croak, sending Gorok to blob them up, use Lord Croak to nuke them from orbit, and then you can pretty much win literally any early game battle with ease. If you're looking to try lizards and want to know the easiest, most powerful route to go, definitely go Gorok, because no one is as strong as him in the faction, and it's not even remotely close. Next up, we come to Norska, and this one, honestly to me, these guys are more or less the same. On the one hand, you have a guy with a sword, but he also has a mammoth, and that's pretty strong in the early game. He's also in a prime position to take over the whole of Norska, and then just go straight down into their empire. On the other hand, you have a troll, who doesn't have, the most powerful units. He has a couple of other trolls, but nothing too crazy for the early game. And he can also take over the whole of Norska and then hop, skip, and a jump over the water into the Empire. So they're pretty much the same. To me, it really comes down to who is exactly on their doorstep, and for that, I think I'm going to have to give it to Wulfric. He doesn't really have to worry about anyone else apart from Norska. Sure, Bellacor's kind of close to him, but he's not really going to, come and attack him super duper early on. Whereas Throg, he is pretty much directly exposed to the actual Chaos Wastes. So directly north of him is all of Chaos, who's eventually going to come down. Daniel might think he wants a little go at it. He's got the Dwarves that are right there. He's got Throt the Unclean, who's right there. The Empire is also really close to Throg. There's also Azazel, who's relatively close. He's just got a lot more potential enemies, and while none of them are set in stone enemies and they're definitely going to come for you, there's a greater chance for him running into trouble than there is for Wulfric, so I'm going to give it to Wulfric for the easiest faction. But of course, there's a Norska rework allegedly coming sometime soon, TM, if C8 ever manages to release an update, which at this point I'm starting to doubt. But it all might change, and if it does, then we can make another list, because, milk those views, baby. So yeah, might all change, but for now, man beats troll. Come to Nurgle, and one lord, it's Kugath. Let's move on. Come on. Next, come to the Ogre Kingdoms, and first we have the choice between a guy that starts near to a bunch of other ogres and can bathe in all the cash he wants, and do all the raiding that he wants to do on the nearby other factions like Cathay and stuff, or even an angry chef who starts out in the middle of nowhere and everybody hates him, and he has to fight for his goddamn life. So basically it's Hell's Kitchen versus Kitchen Nightmares, and Kitchen Nightmares really has it a lot rougher, poor Gordon. Aside from the greenskins, there isn't really a faction that wants to be friends with Scrag, and they only really want to be friends with him because he's destroying all the same shit that they want to destroy. So once they're all destroyed, there's not really going to be any reason to be friends with them, so you'll just have to take them out anyway. So he has no friends, basically, is what I'm getting at. Whereas by contrast, Greasus starts out in the middle of all the ogres in the ogre homeland, and most of the time he can get on with them quite well due to his increased relations from his faction effects. Sure, he starts off at war with one, but once they're taken out, he can be friends with pretty much the rest of them. And onto this nearby Zhao Ming, who he can trade with due to their bonding over daddy issues, which is lore accurate, I'm not making that up. And then he doesn't really have to worry about anybody. Sure, there's Helman and Kugath and Imrik to the far west, but for the most part, he can just kind of stick to his Mountains of Morn and enjoy his relatively peaceful life. Next up, we come to the Skaven, and yeah, this is another one that's not going to be a surprise to literally anyone. The easiest and most powerful of the Skaven Lords is, of course, Ikit Claw. To start off with, he has that insane starting army. He's got Rattling Guns and Doom Flares, as well as his ranged and spellcasting ability of his own. He also starts in Skaven Blight, so has no real massive powerhouse enemies that he needs to worry about. Sure, he's got the Pirates of Sartosa and then Bretonnia's Lords to the north, Belegar's kind of in the same vicinity, but for the most part, none of these are going to come for him super duper early on, so he can just kind of do whatever he wants, taking out minor factions. Skaven Blight's also basically impossible to attack anyway for most factions, so yeah, he doesn't have to worry about it at all. On top of this, he has the Forbidden Workshop right out the gate and spawns in with Warpstone, so can make his units more overpowered right out the gate. There's nothing about him that isn't ridiculously strong. He's super strong, his army's pretty strong, his mechanics are ridiculously strong, his start location is ridiculously strong. He's just a really, really powerful lord, so if you're looking for a rat campaign and want the easiest one possible, Ikit is the choice for you. Next, Slanesh. One lord, Nakari win. Next, please. Now it comes to the Tomb Kings, and honestly, they have it pretty rough these days. Everyone has kind of moved across into the Badlands desert area, and it means their home has become a bit of a royal rumble, and their one safe place to live is now it's a real bitch to live in, let me tell you. Of course, Katep is still in a world of his own pain over by the Dark Elves, and nobody likes Arkan, so it's definitely not those two, but the two previously more safe options are still in quite a lot of danger. Cetra is in the heart of the desert, which means is in the heart of the Badlands Brawl, which means that before long, everyone's going to be on top of him and it's going to be a real fight to survive. He also starts at war with another Tomb King faction, so his only possible friend, which would be another Tomb King, probably not going to like him very much since they're at war with him. Khalida also still has her vampire threat, but now has to worry about Skaven Witch nearby, so she has to clear out a bunch of factions before she can make friends with Lizardmen and anyone else near her, maybe like Thorok. Of course, she does get increased relations with other people, but it's going to take a little while to get there. Overall, between the two, I'd have to give it to Khalida as just being a little bit safer. She doesn't start in the middle of that Badlands Brawl, so she can kind of, you know, once she's finished off the vampires and the rats and made friends with Lizardmen and Thorok and whoever she wants, she can kind of sit on the edge of the Badlands, wait for it all to blow over, and then sneak away in once the fighting has stopped and people have moved on. Yep, the Vampire and Skaven aren't ideal to fight right out the gate, especially for the Tomb Kings, but once done, she is in relative safety. Next up, we have Sinch, the two-headed big bird, of course wins. Let's move on. Now comes to the Vampire Coast, and I really don't think this was going to come as a surprise to anyone, is obviously Count Noctilus. Since the DLC faction has released, Noctilus has been the best lord, and it's not even hard to see why. He's just so much better than the others, it's not fair. He starts in the middle of the map, surrounded by ocean, so no one's really going to come for him, especially in the early game. He also starts with a Necrofex Colossus in his army, which is one of the most powerful units in the game, especially early on when no one can take it out. All he can do is just sit at the back and fire at people, or he can get to the front lines and tear shit up there. He himself is also a fantastic lord to start out with. He has a ton of damage, he's super duper tough, and he has the Lore of the Vampires under his belt, so once he gets a few levels, he's going to have a ton of spell power as well. He's just ridiculously strong in every aspect. Add on to this the fact that his horde can grow very quickly, and then he can recruit Necrofex faster and easier and cheaper than anyone else, and it becomes a bit of a laugh, really. How is it fair on the Pirates of Sartosa, Celostru Defan, and Luther Harkon that this guy is more powerful than all three of them combined? But yeah, it's not really fair, but that is a very piratey thing, so I have to respect it. Noctilus, #1 pirate lord, baby. Now it comes to the Vampire Counts, of course, my personal favourite faction, and I never thought I'd see the day when it comes down between the Von Carsteins and Helmengorst, but here we are. Now for the record, I'm going to go with Isabella von Carstein, half because she's mommy and half because she's better, but between her and Helman, it's actually closer than I ever thought it'd be possible. The Mayo Man in his new starting location, as well as an affinity for early game units, makes him a great pick and very hard to get rid of early on, especially with all his replenishment buffs that he gets. He's a breeze to play and can basically never die. However, the Von Carsteins are just that good and hot. Yeah, they don't have the two legendary lords they used to have, so you can have two ridiculously powerful armies just roaming around the map, but what you do have is one army that's got two legendary lords leading it because Vlad as a hero and Vlad as a lord are statistically identical, so you can just have two lords leading one army, which is ridiculous. You know, they are both fantastic fighters, they both have access to Lord of the Vampires and regeneration, so they never die, do a ton of damage, are impossible to take out, and have a bunch of spell utility. Add on the fact that Isabella has a ton of improvements to heroes, both in her faction and in the army, and Vlad goes from, you know, kind of here to literally off-screen ridiculous levels of overpowered. Yeah, they have no real friends, but they don't really have to worry about that since they can take literally everyone out with just the power couple. The Empire, the Dwarves, literally anyone that get close, you can ruin their lives and make them run in fear with the best power couple in the game. Mommy. Now it comes to the Warriors of Chaos, and with their latest DLC and of course their huge rework, they are pretty damn strong right now, so choosing the best start is honestly a pretty tough choice. You could go for almost any of them. Their start locations don't massively matter since they'll be fighting pretty much everyone most of the time anyway, unless it's another Warriors of Chaos faction, and even then you'll probably want to fight them anyway to get that vassalization. So most of the time it comes down to who you are fighting and who you are fighting them with. And I think I'm going to have to go for Valkyria, and it's mainly because she's a great fighter and can use the bloodletting mechanic, which makes her win a ton of battles in a single turn. Scarbrand is a super strong faction because it can do so many fights and just roam around the map and wipe out entire factions in a single turn. Valkyria has a little bit of that power, so she comes across ridiculously strong. Honestly, this one is really close between her and Bellicor, and honestly, I think you could give it to either of them, but I just went for Valkyria because, you know, the bloodletting is just so damn good. Even though she doesn't have a lot of magic, she's still an excellent fighter and can carry those early game battles completely by herself and fight a bloody lot of them. And finally, we come to the Wood Elves, and it's only fitting we go for the guy who is literally made out of wood, and that is, of course, Durthu himself. He starts in basically the same place as Orion, aka one of the safest places in the map for Wood Elves, inside their little impenetrable forest fortress. He's also a great fighter in the early game as a huge tree man. He has a ton of damage in melee, as well as his spells, and is also pretty tough against early game units since they're not going to be able to get through his tough armor. Add on the fact he can boost forest spirit units in his armies and has no attrition wherever he goes. He can pretty much just go where he wants and do whatever he wants and have a fabulous tree spirit army wherever he goes. He can also still use the stupidly powerful range units that the rest of the Wood Elves can, but now he also has tree spirit units that are way stronger than anyone else can as well. So he has the best of both worlds, and he's a really strong lord, especially in the early game. And that's my list for the best starts for every faction in the game. Let me know your list in the comments down below. I won't read them, but I will take the engagements. Thank you very much. If you like this video, leave it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single video. Finally, if you're feeling especially big penis and want to support the channel directly, you can become a member here on YouTube or a patron on Patreon. Doing so gets you early insights into future content, increased voting power, discounts on merch, as well as shoutouts at the end of videos like Henry took for his support at the officer's tier. Thank you to all supporters. One last thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.